Council will call this meeting to order. For the record, it is February 25th, 2025 at 4:30 p.m. We'll begin this afternoon's work session with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilwoman Little Roberts. Here. Councilman Taylor.
Here.
Councilman Overton.
Here.
Councilman Whitlock.
Here.
Councilwoman Strader.
Here.
Mayor Simison.
Here. Next item up is adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Move we adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion and second to adopt the agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is agreed to. First up, consent agenda.
Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
We approve the consent agenda for the mayor to sign, the clerk to attest.
Second.
Have a motion and second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and consent agenda is agreed to. There were no items moved from the consent agenda, so we will go on to item 8, which is 2025 roadway intersection and community program prioritization. Heather.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. So I'm here this afternoon to discuss the 2025 roadway intersection and community program prioritization process for the fiscal year 2026 through 2030 5-year plan. I hope you had adequate time to look through the list and memo that was sent out a couple weeks ago. And as a reminder, as we start this conversation, for our priorities to be considered, we must submit this list to ACHD no later than March 19th. And this is currently the only time I'm scheduled before you. So a couple of things before we get into the list that I wanted to call your attention to. There is a new format this year for submitting the lists. As you'll see, you have 2 lists. One is for roads and intersections, and then the other is for community programs. These are ranked by priority and include both funded and unfunded projects, whereas last year that was a bit different. So if you see some shifts, part of that is because they are now all together. So the Transportation Commission and the Prioritization Subcommittee met a few times over the last few months, and the lists and rankings that you see are their recommendations for this year. They recognize that most of the projects are very similar to last year's as part of the effort to group them all together. So really they use that as a starting point for this year for the rankings. Historically, the Transportation Commission has placed a kind of importance on safety and congestion using the level of service map that I believe was also included in your memo as an exhibit, looking at ACHD scoring, projects that are actively in construction, and looking at strategic corridors to kind of inform how they rank the projects. So I just wanted to kind of give you an update overview of why I'm here, but really I can just stand for questions that you have on the list. And we can go from there.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Strader.
Thank you, Heather. I wanted to start by complimenting you because this is the most comprehensive packet we've ever received about the 5-year work plan. It is super organized, and the level of service map was really fantastic and helpful. My question was about Locust Grove. So previously, the Transportation Commission had kind of prioritized like a corridor approach, and I saw that bullet point about how there was extra consideration given to like the Eustic corridor. But one thing that kind of stood out to me, in some discussions we've talked about, there are a lot of bottlenecks kind of when you reach North Meridian and you're trying to get, especially from like Eustic Road to Chinden. And I was curious, I didn't see a lot of prioritization of Locust Grove, like north of, McMillan. So I kind of just wanted to understand, is there something about that segment that just didn't work? Is it something that just hasn't been on the list? Kind of help me understand, because I see a lot of different Locust Grove projects, but I don't see it going all the way through.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor and Councilwoman Strader. So part of the conversation with the subcommittee was really, let's look at like the top 3, 5, top 10, maybe in 15, and just focus on those, since that's what we've been looking at year over year. Just knowing that, last year there were several projects that were unprogrammed. So where do we strategically want to have those projects? And you are correct, like in the top 10, you don't see a lot north. And so they were focusing on what we've consistently had in the top 10 and trying to group those projects together. For instance, the Amity Road in Locust Grove, that's why you see a jump for that one on Locust Grove particularly. And that was the subcommittee's emphasis on trying to group corridor projects with intersection projects. But I can't speak to their rationale for further north on Locust Grove. I mean, I think some of them are on the list, but again, it's kind of limited, like which one do you pick first? So they were just focusing on more of the top projects that would be foreseeable in the next 5 years.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Taylor.
Heather, quick question, kind of in the same vein as Councilman Strader on that connectivity on Meridian Road north of McMillan. Well, actually, it's really from Settlers Park north. It's 2 lanes. Can you give me some insight into some of the discussion for the subcommittee's discussion on that? Because the same thing, we kind of have some limited north-south in North Meridian to Chinden. And I just kind of want to know what the sentiment was with, again, she talked about Locust Grove. I'm interested in what the discussion on Meridian Road was and where the subcommittee came down on some of the discussions on that.
Mayor and Councilman Taylor, are you speaking to Meridian Road, Ustick to McMillan? Is that the corridor that you were?
It would be essentially Ustick to Chinden.
Okay, so the entire stretch. To be completely honest, as far as specific corridors, we didn't spend the time to go through every single one, really because they felt confident with the level of service map and the priority rankings from last year. I mean, understanding that, they're looking at here and they can see that it's a level of service C or better. I know, when you actually travel on Meridian Road, it might not be the case because it is a 2-lane road, but really that was their justification, is trying to take small bites of the apple of like, where do we start with the conversation and where do we prioritize the rankings? And so they felt comfortable with some of those where they were from last year.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Strader.
Maybe just to try to close out the loop on that conversation, I'm actually pretty agnostic, like whether we choose to focus on if it's Meridian Road or Locust Grove. Linder's kind of specific and different, but I think it would be very helpful to us to try to prioritize one of those corridors to try to get all the way through to Chinden, because it does really bottleneck pretty badly. Like the Meridian Road example, I think is a good one because you have Heritage Middle School right there. You're down to 2 lanes. There are no sidewalks. Like it's really bottlenecking once you get past that school. And Locust Grove, I think has issues as well. But again, I think maybe just an idea, but it would be good to try to elevate one of the north-south corridors to actually get all the way through it. It doesn't have to be like, obviously we have a lot of priorities here, but since we're elevating so many that are kind of in that corridor, that's what I was thinking, was we needed something to try to get it on the map. So we're starting to program it, even if it's, a ways down the line. But there is just a lot of bottlenecking in that area. And if people could get through to Chinden easily to help bypass McMillan, because you can see from the level of service map, what's going on here with McMillan is a disaster. And the whole thing's red, right? This whole segment that borders my district is like complete nightmare. Not to make it about that, but I do think like if we have some way of people getting around that, that'll help. Like U-Stick will definitely help a little bit with the east-west, and that's programmed, but helping people kind of bypass this north-south seems important to me, even if it's just getting it on kind of the list for future years.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Overton.
And kind of to back up what's being said, I mean, I know we've got Locust Grove, Fairview to Ustick heading north for the first mile segment as number 2. But in the interest of trying to take that whole level F section up, number 12 is the next mile. And it always broke down into the mile segments. I would be willing to look at it as we get closer to a final number of moving that second mile of Locust Grove between Ustick and McMillan up higher into that list, so we could actually try to make that entire corridor a higher service level.
Yeah, and without the benefit of something like Dark Horse at our fingertips that put the fire station right there, long-term, that might also help get it moving quicker along that corridor for that portion.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
question for you about programs. How, who decides what a program is and that makes the list? Is that something the highway district identifies, that local jurisdictions identify, combination?
Councilman Cavanagh, are you speaking to whether they're programmed or not, or whether they're a community program or a road and intersection project?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
the latter, just when I look at I guess for all of these, for roadway priorities and the community programs, who ultimately is the one that is proposing those on this list? Is it us? Is it the highway district? Is it both?
I would say it as us. These are our recommendations to ACHD of what our priorities are as a city.
Got it. Mr. Mayor, follow up.
Councilman Cavanagh.
If we wanted to create a new program for consideration, are we able to do that as part of this list?
Mayor and Councilman Cavanagh, as in when you say program, do you mean like a new project? Like if you wanted to add something onto this list, entirely new?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, yes. And I guess I was speaking specifically to I guess starting on page 7, the community programs list. Because I think those are largely kind of pedestrian connectivity, intersection stuff. It's not necessarily moving of vehicles per se, but are other ancillary projects that have an impact in some degree on traffic and transportation.
That's correct. Yeah, community programs tend to be like sidewalk, pedestrian enhancement, sidewalks, PHBs, traffic calming initiatives and such. So if we were to add something, this would be the way that we would say, hey, ACHD, this is a priority to the city. They do have several that they receive from just community initiatives or efforts or surveys. So I know that they have more than are even on this list that are in their future considerations to review and rank in future years.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Council, I'm at least going to refer you to item number, I guess, draft 2025 city priority number 18 on our roadways project, roads and intersections. That deals with Black Cat from Franklin to Cherry. If those of you that were here may remember last year, I talked at great lengths about this project because speaking of bottlenecks and congestion, you've got a stop sign there at the train tracks that has a huge impact on the flow of traffic. I actually think that the road right now is designed to handle the amount of traffic it has, but it all bottlenecks at that stop sign. When you look into the industrial project that we've approved over there, I think a handful of other projects that are going to be likely requested before us over the next year, I continue to be concerned about that stop sign. In my meetings with the highway district, their response to us has been, well, then make this a community program. And right, we're 2029, 2030 before this project would ever be designed. But if we wanted to address the piece with the stop sign, to maybe segment that out as a community program so they could focus on the main issue, which is the bottleneck that's occurring at the stop sign, and then improve the roadway intersection as we get closer. So when we get to a point of deliberation, that's something I plan to suggest as maybe a meeting of the middle. It addresses the overall larger challenge while still recognizing, 7 or 8 years from now, they'll start to work on actually improving that roadway.
Mr. Mayor,
Sure.
if I can, I like where you're going, Councilman Cavanagh. I do want to just call to your attention, we do have a couple of ACHD staff also available. And if council goes there, I want to make sure that that's possible. Intersections may need to be on the roadways and intersections list. So there is a kind of a gray area to me. What does this classify? Is this a road and intersection improvement at the railroad tracks, or is this more a community program? So they're listening. So if they want to chime in, and if we're headed in a direction where they say, nope, that's the wrong list for your project to be on. So anyways, just want to disclose that they're available.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Thank you for that, Caleb, and I certainly would invite that feedback. I will say, however, that was the director that told me of the highway district that told me to make that recommendation. And so if he and I are both incorrect, that's wonderful, and we're happy to both be corrected.
Mr. Mayor, now I can't wait for Christy or Rebecca to contradict their boss.
Christy, Rebecca, do either one of you have some context to that comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. This is Krista Anselman, the planning supervisor over at ACHD. So it really kind of boils down to what exactly it is you're asking to be done there. So I could see it going either direction. If you're asking for like a full signalized intersection for like full build out of that particular location, I could see it going on the roads and intersections section. But if it's something where you want like an interim treatment, I do think that that does make more sense to go on the community programs list. It kind of just boils down to what you're looking for. I hope that helps answer the question, and neither person is wrong.
Councilman Cameron.
Mr. Mayor, thanks. That's a very nice job of threading the needle on that particular one. Council, I think what I would envision is at a minimum is it's removing the stop sign and replacing it with a flasher. I think that's enough to keep the traffic moving north and south, while calling to attention, hey, that there's a train that, you got to be looking for the train if it's coming. Certainly, I think that there's probably a larger, better approach, but that certainly comes at an excess cost, and I'm looking to try and solve that problem sooner rather than later. It's full disclosure. I have a son who goes to that elementary school that's over there, so I see it all the time. But it is also an issue that I've received a handful of requests from people in District 6 that have voiced that concern about.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
I want to bring up another project on here. Ustick and Venable, the intersection there. Can we speak to a little bit, if we're moving ahead with the new community center at the intersection, I'd want to make sure that the timing of the work there and traffic flow with that would be something that would work well for the city. If you've been there, it's going to be a mess with the expected flow in and out. I see it would seem to me it's a little low on our priority list given the timeliness of that aligning with what we would think would be our target deadlines for that. So again, it looks like it's in draft a city priority of 31. I would think it would need to be much higher than that. Not sure if you want to speak to that, or if we can ask maybe Director Sidaway if he has some thoughts too on what we want to see there.
And maybe Mr. Hood, I think you were involved in how the warrants play into the conversation, if any.
Sure, I can start, and then I think Mr. Sidaway may want to address you as well. And Heather and I have talked, and we actually brought it to the Transportation Commission's attention while they were going through their process that they explained, I think. And if memory serves, I believe Heather even mentioned that we have the new community center that's planned there, and think about anyways, potentially raising this up. They were pretty, I'm paraphrasing that conversation and that whole process, but they're pretty focused on the level of service map and some of the previous criteria, not so much the other considerations of a neighborhood. So they were pretty good, if you will, at that point of not kind of playing in their own personal beliefs or other political things that could factor into these. So they left it kind of where it was, but they knew that they don't make the final decision. And essentially that's what they said is if council wants to move it up, our feelings won't be hurt, but we don't feel comfortable moving it up as a body. And warrants, Mayor, I don't know if you want me to go into that, but this intersection is eligible for a treatment. There is enough volume now, both on the northern Venable leg as well as east-west, obviously on Ustick. So their traffic department at ACHD has said, you're on our radar to some degree, and we would allow an intersection improvement to be here. I think they're leaning towards signal, although they haven't totally discounted the potential for there to be a roundabout at this location, but it's probably a signal.
Mayor and council, yes, we have also heard that the intersection meets warrants for signalization. As we have been meeting with the public as part of our public outreach for the community center project, we have heard clearly from the people in that area that the traffic and particularly that intersection is probably their number one concern. And we've committed to them to try and be part of that solution. We're certainly willing to help participate in a signal in that location. We've talked with the developer about the potential of doing a cooperative development agreement to get that built ahead of schedule, but part of the challenge in getting that approved through ACHD is that it hasn't been identified as a high enough priority. yet by the city to move that along. So I would make the request that it go up higher so that, and it's not because I need ACHD to build it before the community center, but it is so that we can build it with the community center at the same timeline through a cooperative development agreement, hopefully. That would be my goal anyway.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Taylor?
Just a quick follow-up on that. I think it would be a mistake for us to miss the opportunity to address that in conjunction with the development of the community center. I do think it will bring significant amount of traffic there. And also when you look at the multifamily development there, that's been sort of stop-start for a number of years. Their only access to Ustick is to come out on Venable and come north to Ustick and then out. Otherwise, they go back through the community. And they've sort of they've restarted some construction on some projects, but I think it's 200 unit multifamily project there that when that's done, their primary source to Ustick is Venable. So that's sooner than later than the community center on the other side. I would think that we would want to, it would be a mistake for us to not move that up the priority list as a city to ACHD so they understood where our priorities were with that.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton?
just a possible cleanup on the exact same one we're continuing to talk about. If I'm not mistaken, under agency project description, it says install full signal or roundabout. And if I'm not mistaken, the option to build the roundabout is gone due to the development on the south side of Ustick, eliminated that from being a possibility. So we might just want to clean that up. ACHD can confirm or not, but I understood that they could no longer get the right of way to do a roundabout, and it will only be a full signal when it's completed.
The question I was going to ask is if council wants to weigh in at this time or one way or the other, if you'd prefer to have a roundabout or a full signal at this location, just generally. Maybe it's too early, maybe you'd rather think about it, but I think if you're going to move it up, it'd be good to give at least direction on what you think is the best way to move people through this area yourselves. I've got my opinion, but I'm not going to share it at this time, but and if not, no, not a big deal, but just if we're going to convey intentions.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Taylor?
I'm under the same impression as Councilman Overton that the roundabout's not an option because the ACHD didn't purchase the right-of-ways. So that would have to be done, but I could stand to be corrected on that. But I don't disagree with what you're saying either in terms of how we would like to see that move forward if we had an opportunity to weigh in.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cavanagh?
Heather, for the consideration, if we are moving some priorities around, I remember from past years, really, we should be thinking, kind of your earlier comments, we should be thinking top 10, top 15 are really the only ones that kind of rise to the level of, I guess, maybe seeing the highway districts kind of getting their attention in terms of our priorities. So if we're going to move something that's, I think, ranked 31, we would probably need to move it to at least to place 15. Is that the direction we should be following?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman Cavanagh, I would say so. And as you may recall from our joint meeting with ACHD and Director's Head's comments about really focus on the top 3 or 5, because that seems to be what is most feasible to actually get done in, maybe 5 years. So I would say that's really up to your discretion on maybe like top 10, 15. If you're really wanting to see something, it gets it on their radar, they can rank the project. But yeah, if it was past the top 20, I don't see, you pick one or the other over the other.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cavanagh?
From a mechanical standpoint, when we look at number 1, Linda Road overpass, right? That's and how it plays from all the way down to Franklin, where that is designed, a plan. I assume I know they're in the process right now, the right-of-way acquisition and the construction kind of being planned. Does it make sense for us to keep that as number 1 anymore? Do we need to keep it as number 1? If we were to move it, does it jeopardize the momentum of that project?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman Cavanagh, in conversations with ACHD and when Ms. Enselman was at Transportation Commission, there was discussion just about until something's really shovel ready, keeping projects at the top so that ACHD still knows that it's a priority for us until it's actively in construction. So that is why you will see some projects moved that are under construction to make room for other projects to move up the list. And I don't know if Caleb, if you have a further update to provide for Linder that you feel is relevant, but I feel like that mostly covers it.
Mr. Mayor, I guess since I got called out and Councilman Kavanaugh, rest of the council. Yeah, I that is the direction we've received from ACHD is until it's in construction, you should probably keep it on your list so we're not sending mixed messages or that ACHD reads into it that this is no longer a priority. For that project in particular, I don't see that happening. We have a good enough communication with them. They understand this is a good project. However, I don't know that it's worth that risk and we're following the rules. So that's up to you. If you want to pull it back, that's your prerogative. But that is what we've been asked to do is please do have this reflect your priorities until projects are in construction. Regarding phase one, so near the Overland intersection, the southern leg of this, bid opening, I believe, is tomorrow. So notice to proceed is this spring. It's moving to construction, so that won't stop. There is potential though that phase two, so the actual bridge overpass and up to Franklin could be delayed if this fell too far below and ACHD says, wait, it's not a priority anymore. Let's go over here. I don't really see that happening, but
Yeah, my request is that you leave it where it is. I don't think it's going to move anything up or down on the list based on what we do with that. You know, the only thing it may do is send a big signal to someone like ITD board who has to prioritize the next phase of funding. But I don't think we're going to sneak in another project because of this project being listed at 2, 3, or 4.
Mr. Mayor, maybe another quick question then.
Councilman Kavanaugh.
Was there any conversation of the Transportation Commission about project number 6 with Linder Road? I recall this summer a Highway District Commissioner saying because of the cost of this project that Meridian should be prepared that no other projects are going to move forward. And you know, that was telling to me about where the Highway District is coming in on kind of their perception on this project. And while I think it's important, I don't know if it is more important than a lot of the other projects that are on the list. And certainly in light of those comments, it may warrant moving it lower on the list. But I don't know if I always try to really respect where our Transportation Commission comes from and the recommendations they make. I'm just curious if that topic was broached and if they provided any commentary about that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councilman Kavanaugh. The Transportation Commission did discuss Linder Road Cherry to Ustick, not in great depth, but more so just recognizing that they kind of just wanted to keep it where it was at last year based on the concept study that was adopted this past year, and acknowledging that if we're focusing efforts on Linder as a corridor, that at some point this project would most likely be a priority for ACHD, and from when they came for the joint meeting discussing like their next steps. So they just kind of wanted to keep it status quo, as I recall.
Okay. Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Kavanaugh.
Council, my thought on this particular one is that this was a project that was largely initiated by the Highway District. I think maybe moving it out of our top 6 or 7 at least sends a signal that we recognize this is an important project, but maybe not at the expense of other projects that are on our list. So something I'd encourage you all to at least consider.
And if I could add to that, I think, yeah, paraphrasing my conversation with the director on this one is maybe it could be specifically called out in our letter of transmittal that, you know, there may be 2 different sides of this. Look at purchasing right away because it's going to take a long time to purchase it right away. You know, encourage them to continue to purchase right away for the build, but when the time to actually prioritize that for construction, maybe put that in a line where we think that makes sense for other projects.
Okay.
That seemed to be, again, something I think that he indicated, you know, that way gives some certainty to even the people that are living there. Yeah. But it may also mean we got to work with folks on that corridor if those homes become vacant or otherwise.
Okay. Thanks.
I see Christy's raising her hand. Yes, Christy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and council members. I just wanted to quickly reiterate that when we completed the concept study for that one, if you recall, there were up to 35 homes that we would need to acquire. So it's been our direction with this next update to plan for early acquisitions of parcels and to budget for that. So with the next update, you'll likely to see right-of-way dollars in every single year, because that's going to be a big lift to be purchasing that many homes. So our current strategy is to do early acquisitions on ones we know we're going to take, and plan the funding accordingly. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that was the strategy we're going to adopt for that section of Linder.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Strader.
Hey, Christy, maybe a quick question. If you kind of proceeded to do that strategy, how long would it take, do you think, just it's a guess, but how long do you think it would take to eventually get the right of way if we kind of chipped away at it over time? Is that a 10-year project, a 20-year project? I'm just curious kind of what your thoughts are, because I do recall it was a pretty large project.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Strader. So it's going to depend on how much funding we have each year. I think the current strategy is to budget $1 million to $2 million a year, so that we can also keep moving other projects forward while we're still acquiring right-of-way for that. So, I mean, I think the early estimates for the right-of-way acquisition was around 20 million. So it's going to take us some time to acquire that much, or it would be a really big lift in 1 year. So a 10-year plan probably isn't out of the question to get that project going.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Strader.
Yeah, and I actually think that that might be okay in a way, just because I tend to agree with Council President Kavner that I think this is important in the long-term vision, but it's not necessarily something that, like, I personally feel I don't want to sacrifice a lot of other projects to like prioritize this. I think if it's something that we do take 10 plus years to kind of do and we're just chipping away at it over time, like that seems to make sense. That's just feedback from one person, but I would hate to, have that eat up all the dollars and then not get anything else done, because I just don't think that would be acceptable for Meridian.
I concur with those comments as well, if that wasn't clear. Council, any additional questions, comments, thoughts, next steps?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Kavner.
I think that's the right questions for next steps. Heather, the letter needs to be transmitted to the Highway District by the 17th of March. Is that what I remember hearing?
The 19th.
19th. So council, do you want to do any deliberation tonight? Would you like to have a moment, maybe a week, to take into account the feedback from tonight, and maybe we schedule this for a future workshop for maybe some modifications and an action? That seem doable? Seeing some nodding. Okay.
Would you like staff to come back with a recommendation of changes based upon the feedback, or do you want to provide direction to staff on where you'd like to see the items that you've suggested?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Kavner.
Maybe it would at least be good to hear, I go know in years past that staff have kind of brought recommendations to the Transportation Commission. Is that the same format that we have followed this year?
I'll take this one maybe. So Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kavner, rest of council, staff had, and we largely used last year's list this year, and the Transportation Commission largely did the same thing. At this point, I wouldn't be super comfortable having another bite at the apple, if you will. We heard your comments and I've got some notes. There are some conflicting notes though, like number 15 is Meridian Road. So if you bump one up, Meridian Road corridor that we started out talking about now is 16 and out of the top 15. So I think staff would appreciate if you give us a little bit more clarity, and then you guys could digest the updated list and tweak it further in a week or two, or whenever you want to bring it back. If you have time, I would like some numbers. There's not too much here, really. I mean, 4 or 5 projects is kind of what I have down. So if you wouldn't mind some general consensus, and we can send that back out, and then if we need to discuss it more, if you're comfortable with that.
I think the question that for me, for what I heard, that I would think, Meridian or Locust Grove in the north, which corridor, if either, was to be focused on, all the way from Cherry to Chinden would we suggest be that one? If we're gonna follow the U-stick model and we want to prioritize one or the other, and I'm not saying we have to come up with that, but I think that would probably help answer some of these questions if we had a thing, knowing that, one of the biggest challenges, Meridian north of U-stick was not intended to be more than 3, if I recall correctly. So I don't know what the impacts that one are from a right-of-way acquisition. Linder, they hadn't even done that.
So, Mr. Mayor, it's a great point. So both of those corridors, Locust Grove and Meridian, currently at ACHD, are really only planned to be 3 lanes wide. However, we sent them the letter after the last joint meeting, said, please preserve at least 100-foot right of way or 5 lanes on all RTO roads in Meridian. And that's how, if you read it, it says preserve for 3, 4, or 5 on both of those corridors. So there is some constraints on both of those as you get closer to Chinden, because right now ACHD's only been buying the right of way for new development to accommodate a 78-foot road, so, or a 3-lane. So I think there is some, and we could be more clear, almost like the U-stick Venable intersection. If we really think it is going to be signalized and not roundabout, we can clean that up. We could also be clear, though, if we're going to prioritize one or the other corridor as a 5-lane roadway, if that's what council wants to do, we can remove the language about 3, 4, or 5 and say, no, this needs to be at least a 4/5-lane roadway. Can I throw a proposal out there too, just as if we're going to kind of bite this off? I think we have a little bit of time. So just as a reference, and you have the list there, but look, that intersection at Locust Grove and Fairview and the kind of the northern leg of that starts Locust Grove is priority number 2 right now. Don't know if you want to move that or not, but then the next mile up, right, between U-stick and McMillan is 12. And then 49 is the next mile up to Chinden, and that last segment. What I would propose, you could choose either Locust Grove or Meridian. I can see benefits to both, right? Meridian Road has an I-84. Locust Grove serves as largely a detour route for Eagle Road and other purposes. But you have 12 and 15, and you could move the one that's at either 33 or 49 and you'd have the 2-mile segments of either Locust Grove or Meridian at 12 and 15 and have that make a connection at least in the top 15. Pushes the other ones down, at least as an interim. You push the other corridor down pretty far without monkeying with the mid-30s as priorities. But again, if you look at priorities 12, 15, 33, and 49, that's pretty simple to move 12 and 15 together. Again, whether it's Locust Grove or Meridian, but that gets you up to Chinden in the top 15 anyways.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
in the spirit of giving direct feedback today, my preference would be to prioritize Meridian Road, given Eagle 2 miles, you have Meridian 2 miles, you have 10 miles. It seems, and given that Meridian is a much more trafficked road, we have some new developments we've approved north of McMillan on Meridian there on the west side. Because it seems like Meridian roads, I don't know the counts on traffic necessarily, but it seems a bit more of a north-south because of that connectivity with I-84. It would seem like it would make more sense to prioritize that. That's Councilman Taylor's perspective. So I would move those up if we were advocating for that. And I'm curious if other council members agree. I also think that the intersection on Venable and U-stick we should put in the top 10 somewhere, because I do think that we need to signal a strong priority to addressing that. Whether that's a roundabout or a signal, I don't know that I have I actually prefer roundabouts myself in a situation like that, but I don't know if that's the best thing, and I don't even know if it's an option. But I think we ought to highlight that as in the top 10 to make sure that they get our attention with the timing of when we think that the community center is going to come online. Those are really the only 2 ones that I feel pretty strongly about.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Schrader.
It might be good I don't know if ACHD has any feedback, because I think maybe the feasibility would be an important factor. Is one of these a bit easier to achieve than the other? I don't have very strong feelings, to be honest. Like, I think either of them could really help the situation. So I'm not super tied to either one, but is there one of them that, maybe Christy, if you're like, listen, the ship has sailed on Meridian Road for whatever reason, it's just really, really challenging. Or there are some maybe geological considerations, like I have no idea, but just kind of wanted to ask that question between those two kind of final legs to hit Chinden. Is there one of them that is easier to accomplish than the other?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council Member Strader. I don't know that I have at this particular moment a great direction for you on either corridor. I think any of the corridors that we have in the master street map is a 3, 4, or 5. All of those, I think we've already tagged, knowing it's the desire of the city to go to 5 lanes on every arterial. All of them are going to require a concept study because we're going to need to do a deeper dive on property impacts, other existing impacts when it comes to like irrigation or any of those, geographical geological issues. So I think it's just whatever the preference is for the city. I don't think we have designated one as more feasible over another. It's just we know that both we're going to need to be doing some type of a concept to really determine the ultimate treatment and what that's going to look like. I know it's not probably super helpful, but that's all I have.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton.
and not to get into Meridian Road versus Locust Grove conversation too much, but I do favor the Locust Grove simply based on when we look at the current levels of service and the fact that that 2-mile section of Locust Grove is level of service F compared to the C or better for Meridian Road. I know it may not appear that way, but I've got to put some faith and trust into the tools they're doing and providing for us. I think that we kind of owe it to residents to try to hit the reddest areas as hard as we can instead of avoiding that and going with one of the areas that's already got a good service level. 2 cents.
Maybe this one we think about.
I think, Mr. Mayor,
Councilman
might
Cavanagh.
maybe make sense. Thank you, Mr. Mayors. Let's we can work to schedule this for maybe 2 weeks, give council an opportunity if they need to meet with staff directly to talk through concerns or questions, but have this back on the agenda, I assume on March 11th for deliberation and action.
The only thing I'll add to the conversation is one requires 3 miles of work, one requires 1 3/4 of a mile. Not gonna say it's easier, cheaper, but it is less. And we already know the reason why Locust Grove hasn't moved is because of all the right-of-way acquisitions that are required. It's at least been a big part of the reason. So we know that there's that impediment. But that's also where we have the fire engine. And I think getting the fire department to have part of the conversation, if they can help articulate any of the value benefits, might be a good part of the conversation for council to consider.
And Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
that point for our friends from ACHD, recognize we kind of put you on the spot, but if there is some feedback, I think Councilmember Strader asked a very good question about viability. If over the next week and a half, there's an opportunity for them to provide us some of that feedback, I think that's an important consideration as well.
Okay. And with that, we will go ahead and schedule this for 2 weeks, if that works on your guys' calendar for further conversation and dialogue. Okay. Council, with the time, is there a preference on which item you'd like to do next?
Mr. Mayor, I'll look to staff. We feel confident we can do CFP for parks and MIPS in the next 45 minutes? Are we in a spot that we've got to pick one or the other?
I don't know that we need to pick, but I want to make sure we get through whatever one for certain you'd like to hear tonight.
I guess, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Neri, could we move our executive session to after our regular meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm comfortable with starting with item number 9, and we've got Heather here we can move through MIPS, and then we can make a determination about the CFP after that.
With that, we'll move on to item 9, the Meridian intersection pedestrian safety MIPS project updates.
Mr. Mayor,
Is that Councilman Overton?
if I can do a lead into this
You betcha.
before Heather starts talking. So as most of you know, we started this. This was actually through the efforts of the mayor when we first started this task force back in 2023. We had a fairly narrow scope at that time based on several fatalities across our city. And that narrow scope was to focus on those intersections and make sure they were safe and that we didn't have any patterns or things we needed to do better in those areas. And quickly we discovered as we went through all of these intersections and where the locations were of things that happened that they couldn't have been more randomly spread out across our city. Caused our scope to get a little larger as we ended up studying almost every single intersection within the entire community and pathways to some of the schools that kids use all the time. It got to be a much larger project, but at the same time, we had a collaboration of people that was initially ITD, ACHD, Compass, West Data School District, multiple members from our police department, multiple members from community development. And Miranda, when she worked for the city, was our lead on that, on doing the work. And then we suffered an issue when she left, and it kind of dropped for a little bit. And Heather has done a pretty amazing job of picking this up and bringing it to where it is today. And I just want to do a shout out before I turn this over to her, because yesterday was our board meeting at Compass, and they put out the 425-page Regional Safety Action Plan. And in the executive summary for the section on Meridian, first thing they call out is the interagency collaboration of our task force as one of the strong points that they really enjoyed. Now, we had Compass at the table, but they were very impressed that we brought that forward and worked with all our collaborative partners to look for who has funding to take care of what can we get done that's not on anybody's radar, and then eventually to get to the point we're at now, which is where are those items in our city that aren't covered by anybody else? Where are the holes and what can we do moving forward to enhance these levels of safety at these intersections? With that, Heather.
Thank you, Councilman Overton, for the introduction. He kind of stole some of what I was going to say, but that's okay.
Sorry.
He can speak to it better, being part of it for years prior. So I'm here to talk about the MIPS project and recommendations. As you may recall, I was here in early January. We pivoted a bit, and so I'm back. So really, I'm here to just kind of give a brief reminder, projects for consideration, and next steps. So as part of the fiscal year 25 budget, council approved the funding request of $500,000 to support the implementation of these projects. And over the course of the past year plus, we've been working closely with ACHD staff to evaluate all of the projects in this report and to kind of just define which ones are already in progress, which ones would be good opportunities to partner with the city and move forward. And so with that, I will just kind of move into, for the sake of time, some of the project recommendations that we've come up with from the last meeting. So these projects on the screen, these are crosswalk paint projects. They're not significant in cost, but they are identified on the list of recommendations in that initial report. Many of these projects are in the vicinity of other enhanced crossings. There's several PHBs that these crosswalks are near. So really, I believe the MIPS effort was to just bring pedestrian awareness that there is pedestrian activity in this area. And it isn't ACHD standard to mark these crosswalks on adjacent approaches, but after conversations with them, they were willing to take on the additional maintenance effort at these locations after we do the initial placement, if council so chooses. And that would be doing thermoplastic paint, which wears better in weather and lasts longer. And so each of these, there's 13 crosswalks on this, on your screen that would be up for consideration to move forward with. The cost for these would be approximately $52,000. And this includes the thermoplastic paint, construction, traffic control, and flagging. So that's the first group of projects. I can keep moving through them because I have a few categories, but if you have questions, please feel free to stop me.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Heather, how do we determine these crosswalks?
How did we determine, sorry, Mr.
These
Mayor,
versus the other crosswalks that are out in the community?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman Cavanagh, I don't know how they picked one crosswalk over the other. I'm just looking at the report that the task force came up with. And so these were ones that had recommendations. And so I don't know if Councilman Overton wants to speak to that as part of his efforts.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Overton.
So when we were originally looking, there were most of these that you see on this list were never originally picked out by ACHD to have crosswalks. They weren't ones that met their needs at the time. But when we started to look at now as everything's being developed and where pedestrian travel is and school children travel is, we discovered that there were a lot of them that if we could go back in time, probably should have been done. So that's how this list was done. None of these are on the current list of ACHD for crosswalks. We identified them, but they're willing to, if we put them in, they're willing to maintain them from now into the future.
Thank you.
All right, so the next group is pedestrian ramp improvements and some sidewalk repair. So there were a couple of projects on the list that ACHD felt would be a good project for us to do because it doesn't require any significant right-of-way acquisition. And so the two on here are Linder and Turtle Creek. It's the photo on the right. It's at the PHB adjacent to Tully Park. Just improving some of the ped ramps there and placing some there. And then Meridian and Autumn Park Lane, the sidewalk is in a state of disrepair. So those were a couple of projects that they felt would be good, easy, concrete work to do if we were interested. The funds for that could be between up to maybe about 50,000 for both of them. Those are just rough costs, right? This is just kind of us just sketching and trying to come up with some projects. So between the crosswalks and these two concrete projects, that would be kind of an immediate benefit, let's say, for about 102,000. And as you know, you approved 500,000, so that still leaves around $400,000 to apply towards other projects. And so there are several opportunities in the MIPS list. And so this time I'm not coming before you to discuss the PHB at Locust Grove and Woodbridge necessarily. There are several opportunities to look at site vision projects such as Locust Grove and Pine or Locust Grove and Central. I'll go into some additional projects that we've identified through coordination with the mayor's office and ACHD staff that could be greater projects, but they would require further coordination with ACHD and ITD to really scope out and identify what those would be. And so that's just kind of where we're at with those. I would like to just note that in conversations with ACHD, I know that there's a lot of projects on the list, but really it's anything requiring right-of-way acquisition really should be placed in the 5-year plan just because that's a significant effort. So I just wanted to just throw that out there for consideration. So as I alluded to, these are several projects where I think could be opportunities to further coordinate, review, and scope with our partner agencies. Many of these could be improved crossing or improved safety elements. Maybe there's some infrastructure studies and pedestrian and bicycle evaluations, pedestrian ramps. And so the MIPS list has all the recommendations for these projects, but I wanted to at least put these up here that depending on how council would like to proceed in your recommendation on whether we do the crosswalk and sidewalk repair, or if we want to focus on some of these, just kind of putting everything on the table for you. So I think that's really it. The feedback that I received today will inform how I proceed in conversations with ACHD and ITD. And so with that, I can stand for questions and we can have a discussion.
Yeah, so Ken, if I could just add on, I think really at this point in time, the recommendation is do the projects that you've seen that have a general cost and move those forward this spring to the best of our ability while they continue to work on some of these other projects. and potentially bring back future projects that may not get done in this budget year, but we can scope them, and if they can, we would do that, at least to identify with the budget that's been allocated, what that makes sense for. Obviously, that list didn't have any direct what's on these other ones that you were showcased. And I saw one that wasn't on there. I thought Victory and Meridian was gonna be on that list, but so there's still others if people still want to bring them in to look at, but that's the recommendation at this time with the others to be worked on and reviewed future. Councilwoman Schrader.
Mayor, thank you. So I thought it was a good memo. It sounds like what you're looking for. What made sense to me was you're pretty actionable on the crosswalks. They agreed to maintain them. The pedestrian ramp improvement, sidewalk repair feels pretty actionable. I think in terms of like value for what we could put into it, like it feels like a good value to me in terms of the trade-off with enhanced safety compared to what we're investing in. I tend to support moving forward on those. I think we have a lot more exploring to do on the other prioritizations though, and I would just maybe add to that list, and not to like muddy the waters too much. I realize that maybe this is in the community program. It would be great to flesh out what's going on with this stop sign on Black Cat, Franklin to Cherry. I would just like us to try to flesh that out and think of that as a possible project. It may not make sense, but it just feels like it's a more urgent situation. And I would just like to try to figure out, is there something lower cost that we could do on our end? Like, should that be in the kind of list of bigger projects, I guess? But yeah, I'm supportive of like number one and number two in the memo seemed fine. I just think past that, it's like we need to have another meeting once you kind of sort it all out.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll figure out how much we can or can't do getting into some of these projects pretty quick. Okay, I see general head nods.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Governor.
Another thing that I would suggest, and I don't know if the MIPS team looked at this or not, but I know there has been some challenges with getting crosswalks painted along state highways. There's some disconnect that's occurring between maybe the highway district and the state. I think right at the intersection of Overland and Meridian, I continue to receive feedback from residents in Bear Creek, and certainly with the proximity of Wahoo's and Roaring Springs, there is a lot of pedestrian access along there. But it doesn't seem that maybe the highway district and the state are able to connect on getting those repainted. Rather than maybe waiting for them to try and figure out a workflow process, if we could maybe intervene and offer to take care of that as well, that would be another recommendation.
Don't say that out loud. We'll get them to do it.
Well, we've been waiting.
It's really just waiting for the weather before they'll get out. The crews aren't out to do the painting. That's what we've been waiting on. At least that's what they've shared directly with us, that it's on the list to get first and foremost when they get the paint crews out.
And Mr. Mayor, I guess my ask would be maybe for our staff to touch base with the highway district and the state to make sure that that intersection before summer is painted. Appreciate that.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Overton.
Real quick, we identified at least a dozen of those intersections where the crosswalks were almost completely washed out, and brought those to ACHD and ITD's attention. And that, again, what they told us was, it's on, we'll put it on our list. Thank you for bringing it to our attention, but we've got to wait till the weather changes.
All right. Well, with that, we look forward to seeing something move forward this spring and continue conversations and dialogue on the other projects and see what makes sense that we can move forward either by ourselves or in partnership with our partner agencies. Okay, with that, item 10 is comprehensive financial plan update. Mr. Sidaway. Yeah, you just sit back there, Todd. You look good.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I know you heard from some of the admin departments and police last week. I'm here to continue the conversation of the CFP. We've been working over the last couple of months on getting some changes and updates to the CFP. I met with Ann, Councilwoman Little Roberts, back in, can't remember, end of November-ish, and Councilwoman Strader and I met in December. I provided each of you with kind of a 11 by 17 overview of changes. You can see my notes in there are I wrote these out in January and it was kind of reflective of what we've moved and how they aligned with specific comments that we had received from Councilwoman Strader and some proposed changes from Todd. I also think I provided it because I think it does a good job of kind of grouping things together. And as I'm going through the slides, it can be a little overwhelming to just look at all of them one after another. And I thought some grouping and some context were helpful. So that's there just as a reference. And I've grouped these in a few different groups. My first one is kind of the main section here, and that is because as Councilwoman Strader and Councilwoman Little Roberts and I met, one of the big focuses was on, we really need to focus on when parks operationalize. The design itself was maybe less important, but when do we start needing operating costs? When do we start needing staffing? When do we start, and because that's where the ongoing impacts happen. So that was a big focus of our efforts. So I'm going to jump right in. The first one and our top priority would be the community center. The construction is all impact fees. And so that we are hoping to, well, bring that forward here next year or in the next fiscal year. And you all know the site on the west side of Settlers Park. We're looking to do construction in 26 and 27. We're actively in the middle of the design process right now. If the proposed schedule moves forward as planned, this would be opened in FY28. And we are working hard, as you all know, to phase the staffing and to see, to take it a bite at a time and see what's truly needed as we get this open. And you're going to see that this whole first section of separated enhancements kind of explodes all of that, so they're all individual. So I'm just going to move on. The Settlers Park expansion construction is separate, but obviously tied to the community center. This is all the grounds that are part of it. It's the park expansion. It's the 11 acres of the site that's beyond the scope of just the community center. One of its main features is the additional parking that helps to serve the park and the MYB complex. It also has a dog park and open play areas. It's the area that needs the new signalized intersection or roundabout. I hadn't heard that a roundabout was maybe possible. I've only heard signalization, but the idea is to time this with the community center project also over the next couple of years. So we usually bring the construction and the operations as one enhancement, but we've made the conscious decision to explode that here and point out, we don't need you to budget for the operations in 2026. We need the operations when it opens in 2028. So we've separated those, we moved it out. We've shared with each of you the detailed operations pro forma that we've been working on, and we're looking at that in great detail. And then the staffing is also could be part of the same enhancement, but we have separated it just to make the point that how we have bitten this off in individual pieces. So we're looking at a phased staffing model. We propose to open the facility with 2 promotions of existing staff positions, one being the facility manager and one being the classes and camps coordinator. And then we start into, so that would be in 2028 when the facility opens. And then, then the operating for the park, this should probably be a little earlier, but we do need some O&M for the park expansion, fertilizer, restroom supplies, fuel, and some seasonal labor. I did find a correction on this, which we've already made in the CFP, but this slide was already built. About 50-some thousand of that is actually one-time costs for some of the equipment. So that's not all ongoing costs, and some of that would come off of the ongoing request. But then the community center, this is now 2 years after opening. We're out to 2030 now. We have shown the need for 3 potential staff to be open 7 days a week, as you know, into the evening. So the first one we would propose would be number 1 of 3. that would allow for additional evening coverage Monday through Friday if the use is higher demand than what can be done with just checking out keys. We are going to have the access control, and we will do as much as we can with access control. And if that's where we want to leave it, we can do that. But we've also shown that we may get a bigger bang for our buck with 2 part-time positions rather than 1 full-time. But finding evening and weekend part-time help that's year-round has proven difficult at home court. We've recently changed some of those we've combined part-time positions into full-time positions there. And so I've got it built in as 1 full-time, but if the market seems right for getting 2 part-timers, we may try that. And so that's 2030. And then I'll just 2031, we have built in number 2 of 3, and then 2032, we have built in number 3 of 3. And so that's everything. I'll just pause there because that's everything related to the community center and the park expansion. I think Councilwoman Strader had asked early on last fall, do we need all 3 of these staff at 1 year, or can they be spread out? So we have planned to, we're planning for them being spread out, and they can move from there down the road as needed. The next one on the list is Discovery Park Phase 2. Phase 3. Phase 2 is built, but there is a 3rd phase to be done. It is the area south of Phase 2, kind of behind the ball fields and the bike park. And this one did not change in terms of its timing in what was already in the CFP. So there's no changes to it. We're showing it as designed in 2028. It's on the south end of the park, primarily open play fields, possible have some parking and maybe some restrooms. But it's the final phase of Discovery Park. The construction is currently plugged in for 2029, about 4 years from now. And this would include the construction and the operating. And again, like I said, no changes to the original timeline. One that did change, and that's kind of the second one on the little handout, this Gray Cliff sub. I just realized those were kind of flipped in the handout versus the slides. But it's the same 2 years, 2028 for design, 2029. But this one was in 2026. We were ramping up to bring this to you in the coming fiscal year. But we have spoken with the developer. This one is proposed like it would be a partnership with the developer where they would donate the land and the green up, some amenities, and or we would do the amenities, sorry. And but we've reached out. Their timing has slowed down. They're not ready for 2026. Best guess right now is 2028. If we find out a year from now that it's moved faster, it could become 2027, but it's not 2026. And so we've bumped it out 2028 and for the design, and 2029 for construction. And that's where that one currently resides. The next, there's also a maintenance tech staff, and it's tied to both Gray Cliff and Discovery. But with the opening of those 2, there would be the need to bring on 1 additional staff to cover both parks. And that was originally programmed for 2027, but with the movement, we also bumped that one out to 2029. Fields District Community Park is the next one. It's the new park in Northwest Meridian. And we originally had this one potentially programmed in the schedule I brought you last fall in 2027, just a couple years out, primarily based on when we know the sewer's coming from Public Works. And but I think that this one is coming out further. It is in the kind of the latter phases of how that area is going to develop as we understand it. So we've gone ahead and both pushed it out a couple of years, and I will just say right now, it might move out further. But we also divided into 2 phases. So this says phase 1 design. We were thinking about it as a single project previously, but we've split it into 2 phases and moved phase 1 out from from 2027 to 2029. And then the construction from 2028 to 2030. So basically just bumping them both out a year, 2 years each, but 1 year after the other. This one would come with a senior maintenance tech, and we've bumped that out from 2028 to 2031 because we would need that when the park's getting finished, not when the park is beginning construction. West Meridian Regional Park is next and has not moved in the timeline. It's about the time we think utilities will get there. This one's always felt like, you know, it should be closer to developing than it has been because we've owned it for a long time. But this is the one at Cherry Lane near McDermott. And even though it's always been less than a half a mile from existing city limits, and it's an entirely different sewer shed. So we were waiting for the new Black Cat, McDermott, sorry, trunk to come and bring utilities to that area. So we still have this plugged in on the same timeline at 2032 for design, 2033 for construction. And then this one also comes with a senior maintenance tech and vehicle. We moved that position from 2033 to 2034. And this one had 2 positions, but we have split this also into 2 phases, and we've moved the second position clear out to 2039. So now we're 15 years out because we would tie that second position to the second phase. And that's beyond the scope of the 10-year plan we're talking about, but it is in the CFP. It's just further out than 10 years. The next park is Margaret Aldape Park, and this is one that we're very excited about, our first Boise River park. Been talking with the Ewing family for years. And we have moved this out from 2030 to 2033. I'm very sensitive to not wanting to send the message to the family that this is not a priority to us, and I have had conversations with them directly. And we're all in agreement that moving it out feels like the right thing to do, and it kind of matches their current crystal ball of when they would think this might be able to come online based on current development patterns. And a lot can change over the next 7 or 8 years. But and if things did move faster, this could potentially move up. Fields District could move out. I mean, the only constant about the CFP for us is that it changes. So every year we take another look at it, and every year it changes. So what I'm presenting to you, I don't expect to be exactly what it is even 5 years from now. It's going to change next year, and that's okay. This is a tool for us to do our best planning, and we respond to things change all the time, and we respond to those changes and update the CFP annually. We similarly moved out the construction from 2031 to 2034, and then a senior maintenance tech from 2030 to 2035. And then with the addition of those 3 parks that I just covered last, Fields District, West Meridian, Aldape, we would have the need on our structure to add a crew chief, but we bumped that crew chief out from 2030 in the plan to 2035 we could hold off until we get to Aldape Park.
Mr.
Go ahead. That's okay.
Steve, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
go ahead.
I'm going to ask maybe a favor of you. We've obviously got a main meeting that's going to start here in about 15 minutes.
Yep.
And I'd like to give council a quick chance to use the restroom and get a quick bite to eat. So what I'd like, council, if you're comfortable, is that let's recess. Everyone can use the facilities, make any phone calls, grab a quick bite. We'll come back here, and then Steve, if you can, then we'll have you conclude the rest of your presentation. Then we'll just roll right into the 6 o'clock meeting, if that worked for everyone. So I appreciate your patience on that, Steve. I know you probably got other places to be. Just trying to find the balance of getting everything brought together. So Mr. Mayor, if you're open, I'd move that we go ahead and just move into a recess for about 15 minutes.
We stand in recess.
Great, thanks, Mayor. I don't think I need to make a motion to do that.
Mr. Sedway? Yep, if you'd like to continue.
I'd be glad to, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. This next slide is the last of the parks grouping. And I mentioned that Fields District Community Park was split into 2 phases. We were showing phase 2 out in 2035. And the construction doesn't even have a slide because it's further out than 10 years. So the next grouping of CFP requests are those that are related, not related to operationalizing new parks, but still have staffing implications. So I thought that was an important group to pull together. And you see 3 of them at the bottom of the sheet that I handed out, but there's more than that. These are the 3 that move. So I'm just going to run through those. The first one is our volunteer program coordinator. And this is currently, well, we had a volunteer program coordinator already. As you know, last year we morphed that into an events coordinator, got rid of the volunteer coordinator, but definitely see the need to bring it back. Our volunteer program is suffering. We have a way to do that potentially with our existing admin staff and giving them the additional volunteer coordinator responsibilities, but it would require a reclassification. And we will have that for your consideration in the FY26 budget. And if that reclass to our existing position is approved, then this position is actually going to get moved out of the CFP altogether. We have a pathway development maintenance staff as as our pathway network continues to both grow and age. We will at some point need someone that's more specifically devoted to that. We bumped this one out 1 extra year from 2028 to 2029. And then we have a park scheduling specialist built in that didn't move years in 2030. So it's out an additional year from where that one got moved to. They would manage the scheduling of park facilities with our sports organizations as well as internal special events. This function currently is combined with our sports coordinator, but we know with the ongoing growth, at some point, those 2 functions are going to have to split based on growth. If we're not there yet in 2030, this could continue to move, but I'm thinking that's feeling about right. So 2030 is when that is currently proposed. And then the forestry assistant and vehicle, we bumped that out 3 additional years from 2028 to 2031. We do have a growing and aging tree network, but we do contract out the majority of our tree work. We can continue to do that. And we will, we got it plugged in for 2031 and we will bring it back as it's warranted. Then the next grouping of CFP requests are not related to either operationally parks or staffing. A lot of these are one-time costs. This one is, we have a CFP element for purchasing parkland, and they're all impact fee eligible. And they're built over multiple years between 2026 and 2033, and it's just a guess when we're going to want to buy some land. I will tell you that we built in originally a 2026 request that's going to become an FY or 25 amendment here and probably in the next couple of months to purchase the Fields District property that we've been working on and updating you about. But about April, I think we'll be standing before you with a proposal to close on that property. The LOI was approved by council back in January, and we continue to do our due diligence on that. We're currently working on getting legal parcels to acquire that would be building permit eligible in the future, things like that. So somewhere around April, I anticipate bringing a portion of those funds forward, but we still need future land. And one of the locations, I plugged in this image from the presentation I did to you back in October. And, looking far out, that southwest Meridian area that's just white on this map stands out to me as something that needs future parkland. So I'll just put out there, if anyone listening or if any of you ever come across an opportunity for us to acquire what would amount to a larger community or regional park size property, that's something that I would be interested in. Bill, I did have to work in this picture one more time. But Pathway Connections, we have something built in annually. So this amount is not it's a one-time cost, but it's not a one-time request. There's every year there's a piece of it. It's meant to fund new pathway segments and amenities. The master plan is being updated, and I think next year we would just be looking at doing some design work for some of them as opposed to constructing a new segment. But we'll be talking about that more with the budget. There's a request in that Dave Teedy, I don't think he's here tonight, but added to bring Wi-Fi to Kleiner Park, much like was done last year in Settlers Park, to match what we were already doing in Discovery Park. So Settlers Park was done last year. This would do something similar in Kleiner Park. Park identity theming and reinforcement, about every other year we bring a request to you for that. Seasons Park was one of the recent ones. We're currently working on Chateau Park, and just a heads up, where the fabrication is about done on those pieces, and we expect them to be installed this spring. So sometime later this spring, we'll be announcing a ribbon cutting, hopefully soon. But the next one would be Settlers Park, according to our schedule. While it has an identity, there's nothing in its signage or features that actually play off of the Settlers theme. So we may be coming to talk to you about doing some Settlers themed signage like we did Seasons Park themed signage there. But Bear Creek, 8th Street are other ones that are future years. Ustick Road Median Islands. Mike Barton was in front of you, I think it was in November, talking about the medians and the islands. So there's kind of, for ACHD purposes, there's kind of two segments. There's Lyndard 10 Mile and 10 Mile to Black Cat. And the roadway project is under construction out there. If you go and look, I think, and so we are gearing up to do the landscaping and maintain those. I think that's part of that same presentation. We also talked about the Linder Road overpass median islands, and those are scheduled for 2027 currently. So center islands with some artwork and the landscape buffer strips there. We have them in our plan so that we remember that we're taking those on when they come. Shade structures, about every other year, has been a request. This used to be one of the top priorities for our commission. As our park system ages and the trees grow, I think it seems to, in locations that it was important to do this before, it's becoming less important. So I don't know what the next project is. There is an amount. We'll talk about that if there is a need. But again, these are one-time costs, not ongoing costs, but we'll see if there's a need for a shade structure, not in 2026, but in 2027. And then there's a couple of maintenance equipment purchases. One is called a verticutter, which would be for the golf course. It's a thatch remover that's needed out there. We already own the piece of equipment. These are attachments that would go onto an existing piece of equipment. And then the tree limb chipper shredder is part of our arborist work, and we do a lot of tree work, and it would sure help if we had something that we could just chip and shred our own tree work. So Parks and Rec Master Plan, since we're looking out 10 years, we did just finish an update just a couple of years ago. You can see the photo there. We adopted the most recent update in 2023. We plugged in the next update for 2029. We tend to update these about every 5 to 7 years. So I think that is usually impact fee eligible. Is that right, Todd? Can't remember, but I believe it is. Nearing the end, I think I'm done on my last two. This one's just to get it on the radar. I was approached by Sean Evans a couple years ago. At the time, they were looking to move to have us acquire the building that exists in Story Park, reimburse them for the amounts that they had into the building. I don't know if this will continue to be the amount. It's a placeholder, but when it comes time for them when they build their new facility, they will likely be moving their offices, and we would like to make sure that that building becomes a city asset and not something else. And whatever that process is, we're still several years away and we can figure that out, but just to put it on the radar. And then we have recently approved some one-time projects that we would propose for this coming fiscal year. So these are potentially 2026 project requests. Councilman Whitlock and I had a conversation just about a month ago about Discovery Dog Park and requests from the public that have been coming in to expand it. And there is room to expand it without taking over an existing use. So we can talk more about exactly what it is, where it is, why it is later, but we're looking at potentially just expanding that dog park in what was phase one to meet growing demands. And then there's a few Lakeview projects. We've identified an area where there's a lot of cut-through traffic from Black Cat. We would like to do some safety fencing to prevent that cut-through pedestrian traffic. There's a lagoon as part of the pond that just fills with cattails and is a maintenance nightmare that's no longer needed with the new design of the well and system there that we'd like to get rid of, and at the same time get some access to the netting that protects the houses that are behind, so that we can actually get back there and do some maintenance work. There's some corners on the asphalt drive. You can see the community center, or sorry, not the community center, but the pro shop and restaurant area. There's been a longstanding desire to get a sign out there. There's nothing to identify it as Lakeview Golf Course signage wise. So we'd like to do a new sign. And there's some corners on that asphalt loop drive that are always mud all summer long because they're too sharp and they get driven over. So we'd just like to correct that. So small projects, but we'd like to get some of those things taken care of in this next year. And that is my presentation, and I will stand for discussion and questions.
Thank you, council. Any questions for Steve?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Schrader.
just a compliment again, but phenomenal work on, I think, focusing on where you're operationalizing your parks and getting really granular and breaking the costs apart of big projects so that they're more within our control in terms of our operating costs. I thought you did a really good job working through that with us, and I just wanted to compliment you again for that. Thank you.
Council, anything else? All right.
Thank
you
you
very much, Steve.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
that executive session to the conclusion of our main 6 o'clock meeting. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn our work session.
Second.
Have a motion second to adjourn the work session. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Council will call this meeting to order. For the record, it's February 25th, 2025 at 6:13 p.m. We'll begin tonight's regular city council meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilwoman Little Roberts.
Here.
Councilman Taylor.
Here.
Councilman Overton.
Here.
Councilman Whitlock.
Here.
Councilwoman Strainer.
Here.
Mayor Simison.
Here. Next item up is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd all please rise and join us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We had no one sign up for the community invocation, so we'll move on to adoption of the agenda.
Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
move we adopt our agenda as presented.
With
Oh, with the, thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the one noted addition of adding the executive session pursuant to Idaho State Code 74-2061B at the conclusion of our action items this evening.
Second?
Have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as amended. Is there any discussion? If not, in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is agreed to. Ms. Clerk, you want to send up under public forum?
Mr. Mayor, no one signed up.
No one signed up. So with that, we'll move on to item 1, which is resolution number 25-2502, appointing Jimmy Smith to seat 4 of the Meridian Arts Commission. As always, sat down with new chair of the Arts Commission and did interviews of 2 well-qualified candidates. They actually had a former commissioner want to come back from one of the original members of the commission, but he and I decided to go work on a separate project together. And that was great because it gets 2 great people involved in the arts in our community. So Jimmy, he's familiar with people there. He's actually shown up at some of the recent Arts Commission meetings, and someone who's really shown a dedication to getting involved in the arts in Meridian. It's always interesting having someone whose livelihood is around the arts. You know, sign painting is not maybe your traditional art in a lot of ways, but it's definitely an artistic component, and he's going to be working on some of the Arts Across Treasure Valley that CBH is coming out, so definitely, you know, being part of it. But he's already shown a dedicated interest in arts in Meridian by showing up, and he has the time and interest in getting involved. So I know he'll be a great addition to the Arts Commission, and happy to stand for any questions or move forward with the motion on the resolution.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Schrader.
I don't have any questions. I don't know. I would be happy to make a motion, though, that we go ahead and approve resolution 25-2502, establishing the appointment of Jimmy Smith to seat 4 on the Meridian Arts Commission and providing an effective date.
I have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 25-2502. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the resolution is agreed to. With that, we'll move on to item 2, which is public hearing for Pure Vita Ranch Subdivision, TECC 2025-0001. We'll open this public hearing with staff comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The first application before you tonight is a request for a time extension on the previously approved preliminary plat and planned unit development for Pura Vida Ridge Ranch. This site consists of 26.34 acres of land. It's zoned R8 and R15. It's located on the south side of East Lake Hazel Road, approximately a quarter mile east of South Eagle Road at 3727 East Lake Hazel Road. This property was annexed back in 2021, and a preliminary plat was approved consisting of 157 building lots and 35 common lots with certain deviations from UDC standards under a planned unit development. In 2022, the director approved a 2-year time extension allowing until January 19th, 2025 to obtain the city engineer's signature on the first phase final plat and commence the permitted use. No additional conditions were imposed with that extension. The applicant submitted a request for a 2-year time extension on the preliminary plat and planned unit development to obtain the city engineer's signature on the first phase final plat and commence the permitted use. The request was submitted prior to the expiration date as required. With all extensions, the City Council may require the planned unit development and/or preliminary plat to comply with the current provisions of the UDC. The reasons for delay in moving forward with this development are continued coordination with ACHD on drainage issues, completion of the Lake Hazel Road bridge improvements associated with a culvert for 10 Mile Creek, where it passes under the road, and floodplain development requirements. The subject time extension until January 19th, 2027 is requested to commence the use, complete the infrastructure improvements currently occurring in Phase 1, and obtain the city engineer's signature on the final plat. Staff has reviewed the updates to the UDC since the time this project was approved pertaining to open space and site amenities and found the project exceeds the updated standards. Staff is recommending a new condition as a provision of the time extension that requires the 7-foot wide sidewalk planned within the street buffer along Lake Hazel to be widened to 10 feet in width, consistent with the current standards. There has been no written testimony on this application. The applicant is in agreement with the staff report. Staff is recommending approval. Staff will stand for any questions. The applicant is here to present tonight.
Thank you. Council, any questions for staff?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
quick, Sonia, just making sure this is the first time extension request?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cavanagh, no, this is the second time extension. The first one was approved by the director for 2 years.
Thank you.
All right, would the applicant like to come forward? Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Mike Williams. I'm with South Beck and Baird. Our location's 2002 South Vista Avenue in Boise, and I'm also a resident of the city of Meridian, so I do drive into Boise for work, unfortunately. Sonia mentioned that requirement of a 10-foot sidewalk adjacent to Lake Hazel. I want to let the council know that that 10-foot sidewalk has already been installed. We are in agreement with all the conditions that have been placed. The question regarding if this is what number extension this is, as part of the first extension, the infrastructure had not been started on this first final plat. The infrastructure on phase 1 is complete with the exception of the installation of asphalt. And as all you aware, they shut down asphalt typically about November due to temperature. And we're anticipating that the batch plants will come back online in March so we can get paved. The applicant is already working with the city of Meridian as well as ACHD to go ahead and do a surety so we can get that first final plat signed. With that, I'd stand for questions.
Thank you. Council, any questions?
Mr. Mayor, may I clarify with the applicant one thing, please?
Yep.
Mr. Williams mentioned that a 10-foot wide sidewalk has been constructed. I'm a little concerned about that because they were showing 7 feet on their plans before. Was it recently constructed after my staff report went out?
And Mr. Mayor, Sonia, yes, it has.
Okay.
When we talked about it, and I know when we talked about the staff report, I reached out to the applicant because I was kind of freaked out myself.
Yeah.
And they had already installed a 10-foot sidewalk. And the one thing that is sad about that installation is we're going to get to move it based on the fact of ACHD in their right of way. Something wasn't quite organized. So they're going to move a portion of that sidewalk based on what ACHD is requiring for their drainage. But we are going to construct that 10-foot sidewalk.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify. I didn't want to have a condition requiring him to do one thing if they would constructed it otherwise. So thank you.
Council, any additional questions or comments? I'll just say I was actually surprised when I saw this on there because I've driven by there and seen the work being done. So that's why I was like, it was kind of like, you normally don't see work being done on one that you're doing a time extension on. So, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I would agree. Before I retired from a certain city that's your neighbor after 19 years as being a planner, I would have been as shocked as you. But yes, they are close to completion. All we have to do is asphalt, a couple retaining walls, and they are actually changing a couple of the parking areas from asphalt over to concrete just based on they'd rather do that and not have to worry about the maintenance in the future.
All right.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilwoman Schrader.
Any issues with the second condition of maintaining the vegetation on the hillside? Seems like a safety concern.
And Mr. Mayor, Councilman Strader, great question. As part of the original preliminary plat approval, we were required to provide a WUI safety plan because there is definitely hillside on this, and that will be incorporated into the CCNRs where the homeowners will be responsible for maintaining that. I've had, I want to say 2 or 3 conversations with one of your fire department staff so we can work through that as well to ensure that that's inserted and we get all their concerns addressed.
Thank you.
Okay, don't go anywhere. Ms. Quirk, you want to sign up to provide testimony on this item?
Mr. Mayor, no.
Is there a big present that would like to provide testimony on this item? Anyone online, use the raise your hand feature. Does the applicant waive any final comments?
No, sir.
No final comments for the applicant? Okay, right, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
This feels pretty straightforward to me. I'm happy to make a motion that we close a public hearing on item 2.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The public hearing is closed.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Schrader.
considering all staff, applicant, and public testimony, I move to approve file number TECC 2025-001 as presented in the staff report for today's hearing date, noting specifically the requirement for the 10-foot wide detached sidewalk in lieu of the 7-foot sidewalk along East Lake Hazel Road and maintaining the vegetation on the hillside to the fire department's standards.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve item TECC 2025-0001. Is there discussion on the motion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh.
Aye.
Little Roberts.
Aye.
Taylor.
Aye.
Overton.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Whitlock.
All ayes, motion carries. The item is agreed to. Next up is item 3, which is public hearing for Chicken Bucket Subdivision, SHP 2025-0001. We'll open this public hearing with staff comments and dipping sauce.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. The next item on the agenda is the short plat for Chicken Bucket subdivision. The applicant requests to subdivide an existing commercial property into 2 commercial lots for ownership purposes. This site consists of 1.15 acres of land zoned CG located at 667 South Main Street. The property currently consists of 2 commercial buildings situated on a single lot with no proposed changes to the current uses or tenants. The two proposed properties meet the dimensional standards for the CG zoning district, except for the required 35-foot landscape buffer along Meridian Road and Main Street. However, since this is an existing development with no proposed changes beyond the subdivision, an alternative compliance application is not required at this time. Future redevelopment future redevelopment of the property will be subject to UDC 11-3B2, which permits phased landscape improvements as cumulative expansions occur. The city will monitor any future redevelopment, including additions, new construction, to ensure compliance with these requirements. The parking is in compliance with the UDC for both lots. However, staff is recommending a shared parking agreement to be entered into between the 2 lots. Access to this property is provided via South Main Street and South Meridian Road, and the plat note states that there's a blanket cross-access easement between the lots. Staff is recommending approval with conditions and has received written testimony from the applicant asking for some clarification on staff conditions. Staff and the applicant have coordinated on these and are in agreement, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Now, council, any questions for staff? Okay, is the applicant here like to come forward? Good evening. State your name and address for the record.
Trenton Smith, 3773 East Berwick Drive, Nampa, Idaho. I'm with Focus Engineering and Surveying, representing our applicant today. And Mr. Mayor and Council, we appreciate you taking the time to review our short plat application for Chicken Bucket subdivision, the best name ever. Appreciate working with Nick. He's been great to work with, and I don't have anything to add to what he has presented to the council. I do want to add again that we have reviewed all of the comments and conditions, and the applicant is willing to address those and address those appropriately, as we've worked with Nick to make sure that we understand how to move forward appropriately. So again, I don't have anything to add, and I stand for questions.
Thank you. Council, any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Whitlock.
Mayor and Trent, just out of curiosity, why is the desire to split that for ownership purposes? It's not a big lot.
No, it's not a big lot, and I'm not fully in understanding of the ownership, but I think a portion of it is planned to acquire a new owner, and so this is preparing that lot to do so.
Any additional questions? Okay, Ms. Clerk, anyone signed to provide testimony?
Mr. Mayor, no one signed up.
Is there anybody present or online that would like to provide testimony on this item? See no one coming forward, no one raising their hands. Do you have any final comments? Are you waiving any final comments?
We're good.
Final comments are waived. Okay. Council, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cavanagh.
Is anybody rushing to grab a microphone? So I'm happy to get things going. Again, I think this is a pretty clear-cut request, so I'm going to move that we close the public hearing on item 3.
Second.
I have a motion second to close the public hearing on item 3. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The public hearing is closed.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cavanagh.
Shout out to staff doing a nice job tonight. Quick, clear, concise. We appreciate that. Mr. Mayor, I'm going to move that we approve application SHP 2025-0001, include all staff and applicant testimony.
Second.
I have a motion as a second to approve item SHP 2025-001. Is there anybody have any comments they'd like to make or questions on that motion? If not, clerk, call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh. Little Roberts.
Aye.
Taylor.
Aye.
Overton.
Aye.
Strader.
Aye.
Whitlock.
All ayes, motion carries. The item is agreed to. Thank you. Council, anything under future meeting topics?
Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
move we go into executive session pursuant to Idaho State Code 74206 1B.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to go into executive session. Is there discussion? If not, clerk, call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh. Little Roberts.
Aye.
Taylor.
Aye.
Overton. Strader.
Aye.
Whitlock.
All ayes, motion carries. We'll go into executive session.